Before I recognize Senator Whitmire, I have just one kind of follow-up question to where Senator Colhorse was going earlier. For our remaining schools in the Big 12, right now, am I correct that there are three choices? I mean, they either are going to go it alone or stick together or try to reorganize or rebuild the Big 12. Are those basically the three choices that they have?
Or some unforeseen option that would appear to us down the road. I mean, there could be something that goes beyond. There could be scheduling alliances, as an example, or there could be an agreement to keep conferences separate, but to aggregate our negotiating rights on for our television or our streaming. This is going to make for some very strange bedfellows going forward.
Yeah.
These are unprecedented challenges. We don't know what's going to happen with name, image, and likeness. We don't know what's going to happen with the various other aspects of what's going on out there. I mean, we're now 2 years in, we're starting to learn a little bit about the transfer portal that was mentioned earlier. In football, 40% of the transfer portal is walk-ons, people that don't have a scholarship now, and they're out searching. Of the other 60%, half are getting a new scholarship and half are not getting any new scholarship. So they're leaving a scholarship and then trying to move and not get another scholarship. So, those we're learning a little bit after 2 years.
Right.
But name, image, and likeness is 30 days old. We don't know what's going to come of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Whitmire.
Wow, there's been so much said. Talking about the economic incentives of changing alignment, I think you were talking to Senator Perry, and you said when you considered the Big 12 going to 18, that the members, it's kind of interesting to me, you always say the board, which like you have very little to say, but the board decided not to go to 18 because they didn't want to share, they were comfortable, for lack of a better term. So wouldn't you agree that's kind of the driving force of nearly everything, even Senator Coker's discussion? I mean,
that money is the driving force.
Economics. I mean, so would you not agree?
It's certainly one of them. Now, I mentioned the work that we did relative to our football playoff. We had never had a championship game. We believed it had value.
It was a money decision.
We worked over the difficulty of having our two best teams play each other in the last game, and ultimately we decided that was our best chance to put a team in the playoff or maybe have a second team in the playoff.
But when you were considering going to 18, was a recruiting process and discussed?
It varied from institution to institution.
I know, but wouldn't it be fair? I mean, wouldn't it be really fair to say that some of your members just didn't want U of H, for instance, to be able to recruit in the same conference with them in the Gulf Coast area?
I didn't hear that expressed, but we talked about the impact of the Houston area when we met with the folks from the University of Houston, and that was the board chair and the athletic director and the president.
Yeah, I was kept abreast to it, and obviously we're still a little dismayed that you wouldn't see the vitality of the community that even the professor mentioned. So you're at
we also looked at Central Florida as an example, in the Orlando community. We looked at South Florida that was in Tampa. We looked at Las Vegas.
Are you doing that currently? Because you're at 8 and you need to be at 10 at least, I think, under your ESPN agreement.
Well, we're happy that we did the research the last time around, and that will give us a jump start going forward. There may be others that we'll want to consider.
I mean, our instruction was the future. Would it be fair to say you're having those conversations now?
At some level.
Fairly informal.
We haven't had formal conversations on candidate members, because we think there's a sequence in which we need to act, and that includes some of the collaborations that I mentioned earlier.
What's your timetable to consider additional members?
We don't have a timetable at this point.
Well, could you do one for me?
I could, but I don't care to, Senator.
I mean, I really think that's what brings us together today, our interest in the state and the lieutenant governors. So you don't have a timetable on that decision. Let me ask you, your statement was so negative about obviously OU and UT. In fact, when you were talking about the environment we find ourselves in, that this is maybe the worst time because of the uncertainties, and I thought you were going to go ahead and blame the pandemic on UT before you got through, but you stopped just short of that. Could you not speculate, and I was asking you who are you considering, so you don't want to go that route, give us some vision for what you as a commissioner and your board members are looking for. I mean, it's still the doom and gloom by my colleagues. Senator Colhurst does a great job of the Title IX and just the ripple effect of everything we're doing today. Give us your best opportunities. I mean, can't you be more positive than what we find ourselves?
I think we'll have lots of opportunities.
I just don't think the world's come to an end. I mean, A&M takes off the SEC, and we don't hardly miss a moment. UT's a powerhouse, but I don't think the sun rises and shines under their direction. So you've got some outstanding universities. You've got other outstanding universities that would love to join you. Why can't you give us a more encouraged?
I think we'll have lots of opportunities, but I'm not prepared to articulate a time frame. There are strategic aspects of that, and it's just not I'm not prepared to share it publicly.
Okay, this is not my first rodeo. About what you just said, you've got things working that you're not even going to share with us today.
That may very well be true, but
no, I'm smart enough to know that's exactly what's happening. And we're sitting here with our assignment, and you've got the attention of the stakeholders, and we're not getting transparency from you today because you've got discussions going on that's going to affect your members, the ones that would like to perspectives, and you're not even sharing it with us.
I can tell you without any equivocation, I have spoken with no representative of any institution about membership in the Big 12.
Okay, maybe, I don't know who you talk about as representatives, that being athletic director or president.
Athletic director, presidents, boards of trustees.
Where they're talking to each other.
They may be.
And if they are, surely you'd know about it.
Well, anybody that has conversations with another conference has a bylaw obligation to notify me.
And I mean talking about your current members or prospective members. I'm just trying to point out that we're dealing, Senator Perry, you come out in the middle of the night, getting a little in the middle of the night as we sit here. There's discussions and considerations.
Senator, I can't answer a question that I don't have an answer to.
Well,
I could tell you what I said to you. I have not had any conversations, nor has anyone on my staff had any conversations directly or indirectly with any representative of any other school about membership in the Big 12.
That are current members or prospective members?
Prospective members. I talk to my current members every day.
About who they'd like or not like?
No, we haven't had that conversation.
Okay. One last thing. Madam Chair, and thank you for me trying to get back to the future as the Lieutenant Governor asked us to look at. I want to make real clear when I said in my opening remarks that I didn't want, in my judgment after conversations with you, to talk about the future of the PUF in today's hearings. I would encourage us to have discussions about the equality, the equity of the PUF in its own separate hearing. I just don't think that you need to look at football considerations as it would impact the PUF or vice versa. But for years and years, as someone representing an area that does not benefit from the PUF, it's long overdue, and I don't think we have to do it at the detriment of our two flag school universities. I think when you're sitting with $12 billion in a rainy day fund, there's other resources that could go to the non-PUF schools without harming UT or A&M. But someone was taking my remarks that I didn't want to look at the PUF. I welcome the opportunity for this group or your finance committee to look at the PUF. And quite frankly, the whole governance, I think we're seeing it today, of higher education, may be long overdue. I'm not sure we need schools to continue to put a medical school in every city without coming before the legislature.
Senator Whitmire, you bring up such wonderful topics for future interim work by the Higher Education Committee of the Texas Senate. And I'm sure Senator Creighton, Chairman of the Higher Education Committee, will be happy to address those issues, but that's not going to be our focus today.
Yeah, but we're fussing that they make football decisions independently of the legislature. I hate to let everybody know, but they do med schools that way on a regular basis and other significant matters.
That I'm sure the Lieutenant Governor will consider that for future interim charges for
Thank you.
the Higher Education Committee. Today we're talking about the money.
Madam Chair, can I just ask one quick question of you?
Sure.
And I think that Dean Whitmire brought up a great, we're talking about money right now. And somebody brought up to me just recently that the Permanent University Fund through the AUF is worth $2.2 billion. I'm seeing shaking.
Madam Chair,
But I don't know what it's worth. I mean, what are we talking about there?
22.
$24 billion foundation with
Senator Perry, you're
with a
recognized.
$2.5 billion AUF distribution this biennium. 1.7 going to UT and 800 and some change going to A&M. Now, if the public do that,
Well, I think they
PR
just found that out.
The PR campaign's already won. I am about equitable, but I also know that there's a lot of research money that's not being distributed, that if we do it right, we can get it distributed. And that is relevant to this conversation because we are being held out of conferences because we don't have research money. So Houston, all the ones that meet the current criteria have already set programs. We can modify how we distribute that and bring all boats up. And so you will see legislation filed before this special session's over to hopefully right a wrong before we leave here. And I look forward to my colleagues working with me to do that so that every institution, including the schools that are left behind, unfortunately the private schools don't fit. But a lot of the schools that are impacted by this and other issues should be getting those research dollars no different than UT and A&M.
Well, Madam Chair, I didn't mean to open Pandora's box.
In answer to your question, Senator Colcourse, $24 billion. I thought it was 22, but it's 24.
$24 billion in the fund, and the current biennium that we're going to start September 1st, there is $2.5 billion given to two systems.
And Madam Chair,
And we're going to stop this right now. And
I
get
just
back.
wanted to know.
for clarification, Madam Chair, I want to be factual.
Senator Perry, be back.
24 billion roughly based on the last audit, but that does not include, which is land grants on UT's books of 2.1 million acres. That's not in that value. That value, when you consider the reserves, is probably in the 100 billion range. And that's not in that number. And
Thank
guess
you.
where 19 of those counties for that 2.1 million acres are?
Bet they're in your Senate.
They're being West Texas.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Colcourse, for bringing that up. Senator Hughes, you were next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, thanks for your testimony, for walking us through this. And I know it's been lengthy and it's been so helpful. You mentioned your work with the International Olympic Committee. You talked about Stanford. I will just ask for the chair's deference for a moment. Briefly walk us through your sports resume, just briefly, because it's going to help with a couple of questions I got for you.
For the record, not the International Olympic Committee, the United States Olympic Committee.
Forgive me. I gave you a demotion, the U.S. Olympic Committee. Sorry, go ahead.
I began my career at the University of Iowa as an assistant athletic director. I went to Northern Iowa in the same position. Later became the athletic director in a fledgling Division I program, and served for 7 years. In 1990, I moved to the University of Iowa in the Big Ten, and stayed there for a little more than 15 years. At that point, I moved to Stanford University and was the director for 6.5 years at Stanford, and then was recruited to the Big 12 as commissioner.
Thank you for that. I want to make sure we had all that in package together because it's important and it goes to your experience and your ability to answer these questions. Thank you for sharing your experience with us, for what you're doing, and a couple of questions about going forward, as the dean has reminded us. Publicly and privately, UT states that they plan to fulfill the contract and stay with us with the Big 12 through the remainder of the obligation. And you've talked about that as well, how important that is. Tell us, and we believe them, we take their word for it. Tell us, are there things that University of Texas could do that could further undermine the Big 12 at this point? Let's say they've given their notice, they've told us what their plans are, but are there things they could do that could further undermine the Big 12 versus helping the Big 12 stay together and keep moving forward? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I haven't given it great thought, but I think the intentions of the University of Texas and the University of Oklahoma are to participate and to have their student athletes represent the university as well as they possibly can. And on the other side of it, we're going to do everything we can to make the experience for their student athletes and for their coaches, for their fans, just as good as it can be. This will be a difficult 4 years if we're able to get to June 30th of 2025. But they have my commitment, and I think I have their commitment to try and do it as well as we possibly can and get through a difficult circumstance with as little acrimony as humanly possible.
We take them at their word. I understand from what you're saying that you, from the Big 12 standpoint, will do everything you can to support them in that and to keep the Big 12 together through this term and to support all the schools involved and to hold everyone's feet to the fire, so to speak. Is that fair?
Well, I think we want to be constantly vigilant to look for our opportunities, and that process has already begun. But if you were to ask me, do we know which 4 institutions we're going to take? No, it's far too early for that because we haven't even, the board hasn't even made the decision that it wants to take members. There may be other options available to us, and I think sequentially it makes sense to pursue those before thinking about individual membership.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, let's see, Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, this is supposed to be about the future of college sports in Texas. Do you have some concerns about the overall future of college athletics with the, for example, the name, image, and likeness that we approved this session because other states had done it? You know, the concentration of a few power schools, and now we're talking about conferences going to maybe, I've heard 1 super conference and maybe 4. At some point, do you start losing your audience when they're not really a part of it? And you know, we've talked about the college brackets every year and how everybody gets into that because you never know. And
Yeah.
if you really get down to just a few powerful schools and no one else can really compete, this love of money, does it eventually drive you down the road that people don't even love the game anymore and you lose your audience? Do you have any concerns with that overall?
Well, Senator, it's not really very different than the migration of wealth that we see in this country. Fewer and fewer people have more and more wealth all the time, and it's probably not a great thing for our society. The same is true in college athletics. The more the wealth is aggregated in a few places, the less competitive the overall enterprise is, the fewer opportunities we can present to young people. I'm kind of naive. I still believe that we're about helping 18-year-old adolescents become 22-year-old adults, and in the process have a great athletic experience and get a good education. And if that leads to an opportunity to participate in the Olympics, wonderful. If that leads to a professional opportunity, great. That's outstanding. But for the vast majority of the 500,000 athletes that are in Division I, this isn't a vocation. It's never going to be a vocation. And the more we pay to some, the fewer opportunities there are going to be. I think it's simple economics.
Well, and that really is, I share your concern with that. And right now we're in the Olympics, and you were at Stanford. And, Stanford has faced some reductions in revenues. They're cutting Olympic programs, which you just said and mentioned. That's part of what develops our Olympic teams is our university. So as they have less revenue because of moves like this down the road, we're going to have less of an Olympic team. We're going to have less of this. I just see this rippling throughout the system. I have real concerns that in pursuit of the almighty dollar, we're losing our souls, which the point of college athletics, if I remember correctly, was provide people an opportunity to get a college scholarship to get an education. Because what is it, 1% of college athletes ever get any kind of a pro deal? And then the major sports. So most of them are there to get a degree, get an education. That used to be worth a lot. In fact, it's worth more now with tuition going through the roof. I'm just really concerned that we're losing all that. And I just heard just today, we've got a junior in high school who's going to skip his senior year to go to college to get his endorsement deal. Yeah. We already had that problem with colleges not being able to keep kids long enough to get an education. They're going after the pro stuff. How far are we going to start going back to junior high and people skipping? I mean, at some point we're losing our soul chasing the dollar. It was supposed to be about education. And yes, you built team spirit, and unfortunately in our sports-minded world, a good athletic program actually develops your academic program. I mean, that's where we are, but we've got to not lose sight of what the whole point of this was to give kids an education and give some kids who may not be able to afford it an opportunity if they were good at a sport to get a gifted education. And it's just very distressing. Like I say, these are all happening. And it's not even just a UTOU thing. This is all happening at one time. Mm-hmm. So do you share those concerns, what's happening? I
do share those concerns. The American collegiate model only exists in this country. Mm-hmm. In addition to 80% of the Summer Olympic team coming through our collegiate programs, about 30% of the rest of the world's Olympians come through our programs. Mm-hmm. Kids like Joseph Schooling from Hong Kong that wins an Olympic gold medal and comes to the University of Texas. I think there's every reason to be concerned about that. The American Collegiate Scholarship Program is the second largest scholarship program in our country's history, second only to the GI Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. Well, you brought it up. The concentration of wealth, one of the reasons why we have a middle income in this country is we don't limit how many people can go to the colleges. A lot of countries, you have to score on a certain test to even get to go to university. Whereas we have all kind of opportunities. That's why we have such a large middle income. And it's a way of spreading that wealth out by people having good education, getting good jobs. And if we keep cutting off these opportunities because we're chasing the dollar, I think it's going to end up hurting all of us as a country, and not beyond sports. I mean, that's what this committee is about today, but I'm concerned about just college degrees, certifications, those kind of things. I think we're harming all that with this pursuit of just money, money, money. And that seems to be all we're worried about, not the students. I mean, the name, image, and likeness came because they felt like the students were getting left behind, but the students were getting a benefit, and I think we're going to lose it over that. Anyway, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Chairman Burrows, you've been very patient. I wanted to hear from the senators on the committee first, but we are certainly recognizing you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a few questions. And I want to pick up on some of the things that Senator Colcourse were talking about. Just so everyone's clear, what is the difference between the super conference and a mega conference?
If there's a difference, I couldn't articulate it for you.
I've heard the idea of a mega conference is maybe 30 teams and it kind of is of its own versus, this idea of 4 or 5 super conferences. Have you heard that or call it something?
You have to be a little careful about reading the popular media during slow news times.
Okay. Well, you may have missed the popular news, which is Twitter, which I think the senator was alluding to. Clemson and Florida State have applied to maybe be part of the SEC. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware of that.
And that seemed to have been breaking, I think, while you were testifying. So let me ask you this question. Is there anything that prevents the SEC from leaving the NCAA?
No.
So let's say they go and they get Florida State and Clemson and maybe Ohio State and Michigan. I've heard they're in talks there. Maybe a Michigan plane was actually on the tarmac, here at UT while some people were landing. So what would happen if SEC got to 30 teams, maybe the highest profile in each of the conference, and left the NCAA altogether?
Be a clear haves and have-nots.
Well, would it also mean that they wouldn't have to play in the College World Series or March Madness and just have their own branded conference tournaments?
They would certainly potentially do that.
Yeah, maybe ESPN, thinks that's a good idea and, can make more money that way.
I think it's a fair leap.
Would that have a impact, maybe even on high school sports in Texas, if there's only 30 teams across the country playing each other and the other 90 some odd schools are left out of any conference that actually gets ESPN coverage?
If those were the only 30 that anybody wanted to play for, I think that would be the effect. And now, we have Division II and we have Division III and we have FCS football, and there are lots of great experiences at those levels. But if you aspire to play at the highest level, you're going to want to play among those 30 schools.
Do you know if the University of Texas had been in any sort of think tanks or other groups talking about the idea of getting to one mega conference and perhaps not being part of the NCAA?
I'm not aware of those discussions.
Okay. I want to clear up another thing. There was some testimony you gave about, 18 teams that were looking at, or y'all were sifting through to see if they could join the Big 12.
We interviewed them.
Yeah, and at some point in time, my understanding is at least Texas Tech and maybe some of the other Texas schools did come out publicly in support of University of Houston joining. Are you aware of that?
I saw those comments, yes.
Okay, they came out because they thought it'd be good for the entire state for Houston to join the Big 12 at that period of time.
I believe that's why they did it.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that was on the record as we went through today. Let me finish talking about this. I had the opportunity to look through. Those are the Big 12 conference bylaws. Can you see from there?
I can see the paper.
Okay, fair enough. I want to talk about two provisions in the Big 12 conference bylaws. First, the bylaws require that the conference is going to last for 99 years. Is that right?
I don't know if it's a forecast that it'll last for 99 years, but it's a mutual commitment to 99 years if it lasts that long.
All the teams, including the University of Texas, signed this bylaw agreement with all the other members of the conference would be in existence and committed to 99 years. Is that right?
Everyone collaborated in the writing and editing of those bylaws, and all 10 signed the bylaws.
They put their signature on it, correct?
Correct.
And then another provision in there I think is really interesting. It talks about sanctionings of a member. And it talks about, the members shall not be engaged in any action or course of conduct materially adverse to the best interests of the conference taken as a whole. Are you aware that's in there?
I am.
Why are those provisions important to the other schools or all of the members to have in to each other?
Well, I think generally speaking, good fences make good neighbors. So declaring what you believe in and having all members as signatories to the document is the best way to provide clarification as to what the expectations are.
Okay. And beyond that, I would assume that each of the members, if they're going to be part of this conference and they're going to put their TV rights in there, they want some assurances that the conference is going to be around.
Correct.
And they're going to want some assurances that all the other members are conducting themselves and comporting their behavior the same as they expect of each other.
I think the traditions and history as well as the documents would lead one to believe that.
Because it's important to them.
Correct.
And it's important to the revenues of their athletic institutions, their universities.
Well, it's also important to their bond rating and their debt service and a lot of other things that reach far into the future.
And that expectation was so important that it wasn't just a handshake deal. They actually put this on paper, correct?
That's correct.
Because of all the things we talked about. Well, let me ask you this. Since you've now gotten news that the University of Texas and OU are joining the SEC, do you have any indication how long that plan had been in the works?
I do not.
Do you think it'd been longer than perhaps the day you found out about it?
I do.
What's led you to the conclusion that this has been going on for some period of time?
Because these things don't happen overnight. Those conversations typically are weeks, if not months.
The thing speaks for itself.
I believe it does.
Okay. I mean, high probability they've been doing this for weeks, if not months, behind your back, behind the backs of the other members, and maybe even behind the backs of the legislature while we were in session.
Individuals or emissaries.
Okay. And then So let me ask you this: if a member of the Big 12 had been out trying to, go to another conference, build a mega conference, doing all these things behind the backs of the other members, do you think that would be in the best interest of the conference taken as a whole?
No.
All right, and Madam Chair, I know we're not going to talk about the permanent university fund, but I will make one comment. Senator Perry, I hope you file that bill. We're going to file one in the House as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Creighton.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, just a couple of remaining questions I have, and they're somewhat sporadic, so bear with me, but we've had a lot of great testimony. Just to follow up on Senator Taylor's comments about name, image, and likeness, do you feel that the state of Texas should have been the lone holdout in the Big 12 and the SEC, just talking about how it affects both conferences on name, image, and likeness, or do you feel like the legislature made the correct move in passing that legislation, knowing that critical mass had already happened with Alabama, Florida, California, other big states?
There's no short answer to that, Senator. I'm sorry, but I'll take a crack at it. I think it was fine that the Texas legislature went ahead with what they did. I think we had a package, and I was co-chair of the NCAA's committee on this, that had significant guardrails, had guidelines for the members, had stipulations on what could and couldn't be done. It would have provided a great deal more guidance to the members. The lawyers got to the leadership of the NCAA and convinced them that doing a minimalist approach was the right thing to do from a litigation standpoint, but it left the members to fend for themselves. And so at that point, you're either in a state that doesn't have a law and doesn't have a meaningful and prescriptive NCAA set of guidelines, or you're in a state that passes a state law. And the NCAA was fully prepared to yield to any place that had state laws. It hasn't quite reached critical mass yet. There are only 9 states that have effective laws that are in place right now. Many more have passed legislation that will come effective in 22 or 23 or beyond. So that is going to be the trend. We have also worked with representatives in Washington, D.C. to talk about whether or not there should be preemption of the state laws and in the name of consistency, and whether or not there was even any narrow protection around the plaintiff's bar that is certainly anxious to have us implement a policy and then challenge any restriction that may be in there. So it's a long ways from resolved, and we expect that we're going to be dealing with it for a long time. But I think having a state law is better than not having either guidance from the NCAA or a state law.
Would you have been comfortable as commissioner of the Big 12 if Texas would have just decided to hold off taking any action whatsoever in
Texas as a state or a university?
Texas legislature, if we would not have passed that name, image, and
legislation?
Well,
we have 4 other states in our footprint that haven't passed legislation. They're all talking about it, and it may, we may get there at some point in time in those other states. Obviously, it creates some challenges for us if some of our states have a law. The good thing, if there is a good thing to this, is that the state laws tend to fall within some boundaries, and they tend to, there are a few of them that are outliers that have trust funds or unique stipulations, but generally speaking, they're pretty much down the same pathway. And so the comparisons of the two are not as difficult. But if as an example, in the SEC, 11 of the 12 states have laws. They aren't all the same, so they're wrestling with that, but at least they have some guidance.
Coming into the session, we felt the NCAA would have acted and issued guidance by January the 31st. We started in early January, and that did not happen, so we decided to press forward.
Well, there were
Going
two
back-
reasons for that, and perhaps you know them, but I'll supply them if you don't. The NCAA got a letter from the Department of Justice challenging both NIL and the transfer portal, and at the same time, frankly, I think we were surprised that the Supreme Court took the Alston case, and we knew it was going to be into June before that opinion came down.
Going back to the subject of UT exiting the conference, is the Big 12 due advance notice of a member of the conference entering into discussions with another conference?
Yeah, whether institutionally initiated or whether initiated by the conference, whether it was an official inquiry or something that happened anecdotally, there is a bylaw that requires notification to the commissioner within 12 hours of that. And then there's a second part to it that there needs to be a public denial of that if it's not accurate.
So does that depend on this? The section you reference is 3.2, correct?
Correct.
Does that depend on inducement by the outside conference, or whether there is or is
It doesn't address inducements. It just addresses the conversation itself.
So in your opinion, with UT issuing notice to the Big 12 that they were not induced by the SEC to begin negotiations or talks, is that irrelevant?
Well, it wouldn't be if I was confident that that was when the discussion started.
So when you use words like undermine the rest of the members of the conference and deception, and you point that rhetoric at the University of Texas, you still feel like even though they've placed those answers in writing that they were not induced by the SEC, you still hold firm in your testimony and your position that they undermined the other members of the Big 12 and that they were deceptive.
They didn't comply with the bylaws.
So tell me further on complying with the bylaws with Section 3.2. How did they specifically not comply?
They didn't notify me of their conversations within 12 hours of them first taking place.
So I look at that distinction as based on inducement or not inducement by the SEC, inviting those discussions. But if UT reaches out, as they say they have, I look at that as a distinction in Section 3.2 and a distinction that clearly excludes their responsibility to notify within that 12 hours. Do you agree or not agree?
I disagree with that.
I appreciate that stance. I wanted to clarify it. What has to happen for the Big 12 to stay intact, in your opinion?
We're going to see as we go forward to the previous questions. Our board has had a number of conversations. We'll have additional conversations. I think that we have begun to evolve around strategy, but then the execution of that strategy takes some time. And there are some options that are not going to be real rapid. They're not going to bear immediate fruit. They aren't the kinds of things because there could be multiple organizations or multiple individual institutions involved that they have boards of trustees and regents, and they have a governance structure. They also have state legislative structures, and those kinds of things are not going to happen quickly. And so we're in the process of moving forward and putting plans together. I believe our members think that our best opportunity is to stay together and to find solutions together, and that is the plan at this time.
Do you have any advice for the remaining members of the Big 12 as they may be approached by other conferences?
Well, only what I just said. I think our stronger position is to stay together.
Stay together.
Each institution ultimately is going to make its own decisions. I mean, we understand that. No one would criticize anybody for acting in their own interests, but there's right ways and wrong ways to do that.
But you're not aware of any other members of the Big 12 currently entering negotiations or discussions with other Power 5?
If I was aware of that, they would get the same letter that OU and UT got relative to violations of the bylaws.
I was hearing speculation that Kansas was in negotiations, but that could be exactly what that is, speculation. So with your statements about UT violating the bylaws and deceiving and undermining the rest of the conference, did you feel the same way about A&M when they exited?
I wasn't the commissioner at the time.
So you were just a few months. You came in 2012, just a few months after that exit.
Senator, I really don't know when they left. Were they in the second tranche?
Well, you had
Two left 1 year and two left another year, and I've never gone back and looked through the time sequence on that.
Because when A&M exited, they broke a 13-year contract that was $1.3 billion in total value with Fox Sports, and we did not have a legislative hearing over that. So I was in the legislature at the time, but I couldn't find much in any public record about discussions other than through the media, and we'll take that for what it's worth. But I just wondered if the timing of your coming into the Big 12 and A&M's exit, if there were conversations when you were being interviewed just about the impact of that, knowing that Nebraska, Colorado, Missouri, and A&M all at that time over the years had already exited.
And I think they wanted to keep that from me as much as possible.
Okay.
I will tell you, frankly, I interviewed in President Bill Powers' office with Bill and two other CEOs and one AD, and I said, I'm minding my own business out in California. Why should I take this job? This looks like rats leaving a sinking ship. And what they did for the next 2 hours was convince me all the ways in which the public perception and the private reality were not the same thing. And ultimately that carried the day, and I took the job.
In politics, I understand that comparison. So I certainly get your comparison without a doubt. So but at that time, I couldn't find through any of the articles, anything online, no matter what I could get my hands on to read, that deception and undermining the rest of the conference was launched at A&M, even though there were contracts in place at this time, and this announcement is based on, I believe, UT intending to honor all current agreements. So that's your interpretation, is that they...
Well, the bylaws that are in place now were adopted in 12, so they wouldn't have been subject to the same bylaws at that time.
And then prior to those bylaws, I think all of the members of the Big 12 had to waive any legal recourse against A&M for leaving the conference to go to the SEC. And now within the Big 12 bylaws, that waiver does not exist as a requirement. Is that correct?
It doesn't exist in the current documents. I'm not familiar with the predecessor documents.
Got it. So with critical mass, we talked about that with NIL. What is critical mass for the Big 12? I mean, we've talked about Nebraska exited. We talked about Colorado exited. We talked about Missouri chose to exit. A&M certainly chose to exit. At this time, OU and Texas have chosen to exit. We focused a lot about the Longhorns today, and I understand that, and everyone should come to the table and explain themselves. That's just what the public is due, and it's very appropriate. And I think all these questions by all the members have been excellent as we continue to vet this issue, and we do a deeper dive into the future of college sports, and understanding that if there are any obligations on us as public officials to be more aware, of the impact of these types of occurrences, knowing that we have delegated from the legislature, we have delegated authority to the boards of regents from all these respective universities to do exactly what is best for that particular university. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, collectively, we're members of a conference, and we have to do our best to not harm other members of the conference, which I think within the bylaws, and with what Representative Burrows referred to, that means current members of the conference. That doesn't necessarily mean withdrawing and exiting to go to another conference. That's my interpretation, but this is all legalese. We all just try to keep up. So I just wondered, with those things, what is critical mass for the Big 12 that's remaining? What teams could exit where the conference would be no more?
Well, from a purely legal standing, only one member would have to be retaining. It's sort of a theoretical question, but from a purely legal standpoint, one member would retain the standing. As a practical matter, obviously you can't play yourself.
As a practical matter of value is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, well, there's I suppose that there's a future scenario where the board would meet and say, we believe that we can do better individually, and so we should dissolve the conference. I've seen nothing from any of our leadership that would lead me to believe that is something they would like to consider. But is it impossible to think that could happen? Sure, it could happen.
Thank you very much for that. And last, do you know by chance who paid for the Perryman economic report?
I have been through it a couple times. I don't know that I can quote chapter and verse.
Do you know who paid for the report?
I do not know.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me tell you, you've done an excellent job. You've been up here a long time, and I know there might be a few more questions. But thank you for your time today and your input and answering all of these very thorough questions, Commissioner.
Thank you, Senator.
Madam Chair.
You bet. Let me drill down on a question that Senator Creighton asked. I want to be sure I understood what your response was. So it's your opinion that the three schools that we're talking about here today will stick together and kind of offer themselves as a package? Is that your opinion?
We haven't had the conversation about the three schools.
I'm talking Baylor Tech and TCU.
Yeah, but our conversations have been among the eight remaining members, and we haven't had any discussions about any subgroups of that, including the three in Texas.
So, but you made a comment, I can't remember exactly what you said, but I kind of thought that you were leading us to the conclusion that they'd stick together and kind of be an all for one, one for all.
Well, I did say that, but I was referring to the 8 remaining members, not the 3.
Not just those 3, but you think the 8 will?
I think our best option is to stay together and fully pursue the array of possibilities and then make some decisions.
Okay. Thank you. Members, I don't see any more lights on except for Senator Powell's light, who we can't get off. Any other questions, members? Certainly from the House members as well. No. Thank you so much for coming before us and the information that you provided to the committee. We're very grateful.
Thank you very much for your time, and my statement is a matter of the record. So.